What I wanted to talk about is you and Goldie today were talking about Cuba and Iran, and that Iran's had it worse than Cuba. And I want to say that is correct. I know Iran's only been for 47 years, Cuba's been 67 years. That extra generation serves a purpose. But I also want to bring up something that was in the Goldie's chat. I'm not going to say who said it, but the fear was that Iran would turn into another Cuba. So that was the fear. I never got an answer response back as to what makes you think that. But you need to understand there's a difference between what happened in Cuba those first 10 years, because you got to understand something. The military was not with Castro to begin with. They joined Castro because the people, just like the communists in that took the the American embassy in Iran, those people, okay, came on, okay, and they were very happy because they were given power over the people that were the owners of the business they worked on and stuff like that. There, when you have that change, and that's what Castro did, it caused problems. When I tell you that these business owners were made to go in their 70s and 65, 70, 80s to go chop sugar cane with machetes, that's brutal work. Even for young guys in their 20s, that's brutal work. A couple years, 10 years, 20 years of that, and you're shot. You're an old man, even though you only hit 40. Okay. So that was brutal. Now, what you said is actually right, though, because they've never been a enemy of the state, as the Iranian people have been an enemy of the state since the very beginning of inception. So you are 100% right, and I congratulate you for understanding that, because that's something that I don't think people understand. The two situations are totally different. It's only in the last 20, 25 years that the Cuban people have started to have enough. That's all I have.
I have a question for you, Jose. Do you think that the Cuban government is capable, willing to do a massacre on their people at the level that we saw in early January in Iran by the Islamic Republic?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Nope. Okay. I think the problem with the Cuban people right now is they told the United States, after being offered $100 million in supplies, humanitarian aid, which I imagine at least a quarter, if not half, would be medicinal supplies and that kind of stuff. They told the United States they're not interested. That's also hurt them because the current, I don't know what to call her, president of Mexico, that sent two warships to Cuba with humanitarian aid. That humanitarian aid, the food at least, was spent in Havana and didn't leave Havana. Havana's a big city, but not every part of Havana receives shit. Okay. And the people that seem to enjoying the auspices of those two ships might have been the people that flew in from the United States wearing pink. All right. So that's how we, the Cubans in Florida, Miami, Tampa, Kissimmee, see the situation. We pray for the people of Cuba. Right now, we'll see, because we can see it going two ways. It's the Castros that really have the power in that country, not this guy that's the mouthpiece. Okay.
So let me just, and before, I don't know if we have any twos in the chat regarding this, but let me just tell you how I see it, a simplified version of everything. And you tell me just quickly how accurate this is. Okay. So if we want to compare the situation in Cuba versus in Iran, if we basically look at the anti-regime forces, the situation in Iran is that because the Islamic Republic is willing to do a lot more against its people, and it has so much lower standard and is ready to get a lot more violent, then the cost of suppression for the Islamic Republic is lower because it doesn't have to try to avoid killing people. It's easier to suppress people when you don't care how many people you kill and you're willing to go that far, right? So that's why the Islamic Republic, in that sense, has the upper hand. But The reason why, from another sense, the Cuban government has the upper hand is that the level of anger that the Iranian people, the level of hate and anger that the Iranian people have towards the Islamic Republic, we do have a lot of dissatisfaction and anger against the Cuban government in Cuba, but it's not to the same level as the level of hate that the Iranian people have. Is that a good summary, or no?
Very good summary. I like to add one other thing that some people don't understand. You're seeing the news that the Cuban people are angry at President Trump. Hell no. They'll name streets after Trump. They want Trump to take down that government. They want capitalism to come back. They want to be able to make more than $15 US as a doctor a month. Okay? They want that. So it's not what you think you see, it's what's actually happening there. That's all.
Thank you. That's really good information. By the way, Jose, I really appreciate having you here because I think Cuba is very important for the whole world to pay attention to, and your knowledge on this is going to be very beneficial to this group. So thank you so much for being here. Before we go to the next person,
Not
yeah, somebody in the YouTube chat is saying, is school for everyone or only VIP? Tomorrow is for everyone. Today is VIP members, but tomorrow is open to everybody. If you wanted to come without it being for VIP only, tomorrow same time. Okay, we have a response. BT? Okay, I think Sketch. BT, I can read it if you want. I can
Yes.
read the. Oh yeah. Okay, Sketch, go ahead.
I wanted to say that when you were talking about a cost analysis, right? How much would it cost to control the population with the amount of money that the IRGC has? I remember
Right.
saying that it could become something like Cuba, in that Cuba does not care about spending on infrastructure. If you look at the Cuban streets, if you look at the buildings, they only care about their little areas that they control and live in, but they don't really care about anything outside that. They don't care how people go back and forth. If they got to get on a donkey, they just do not care. And if you have that level of not care, now I have seen, from what I have seen of the Iranian streets, from the more rural areas do look more rural, but it seems to be like very nice cities. It seems to be like a thriving economy. It doesn't look bad. But if you look at Cuba right now, it's very different of the Cuba of old, because the regime in Cuba is so focused on their areas and they're keeping control and using the money for themselves, that the rest of the infrastructure is dilapidated. So when you were talking about the economics of staying in power, yeah, that I think I made a comment on that it could go the way of Cuba, where they spend only money on keeping their control and they don't care about hospitals, they don't care about anything that has to do with the majority of the population. That's the way that it could go the way of Cuba in as far as spending. That's what I was alluding to.
Yeah, yesterday Ali and I were using AI to calculate how much the Islamic Republic would need to survive if they cut everything, right? So imagine if the economic blockade was working very effectively, and because the main point of the economic blockade is to make it so that the Islamic Republic cannot pay for the armed forces to, especially to suppress the Iranian people so we could have an uprising. The problem is that as the Islamic Republic keeps losing funds, they will cut everything else first before they even get to the armed forces. The armed forces will be the last thing they cut, if they cut at all, right? So they will cut everything else that runs the country. They will cut that first. And we were basically calculating, if they cut everything, absolutely everything, and the only thing they need is to have enough armed forces to shoot at crowds of Iranian people to be able to suppress them. So we basically came up with a population of, let's say, 5 million Iranians uprising, right? We first got the number that is needed to suppress that. But then we got a big number, but that number was with the assumption that the Islamic Republic is a normal dictatorship that is not willing to do something like what they did in early January. So that was like a big number in the millions, that the Islamic, like above 1 million, that the Islamic Republic needs in armed forces to be able to suppress an uprising of 5 million people, right? But then we calculated it. We basically made it calculate how many armed forces does it need if it's willing to shoot into, using machine guns, shoot into crowds of people to suppress them. then that number was reduced to 100K to 300K, if it's willing to do that, which it is. And then we basically made it calculate what would be the cost of that if the Islamic Republic basically cuts everything else and just wants to keep this, only pay for this so that it could suppress the Iranian people uprising. That number was as low as 1.5 billion to $2 billion, which is a year, which is a very low number. Like, even with the blockade, there are ways for the Islamic Republic to get $2 billion a year, right? But here's where things changed. Then we basically made it calculate how much all of this calculation would change if the Iranian people were armed. And everything changed, and the calculation completely flipped. It become astronomically, you need an like way more people, back in the millions, and the money required for that will become so much more that with the blockade, the Islamic Republic would not be able to afford that. So that's what me and Ali went through yesterday on the live show with each other, which I'm going to make a short video about, by the way.
Sketch, you're right. I just want to tell you that you're right. But the bigger problem is that, and Armin, yes, the analysis you did with Ali last night was incredible. I get it. The problem is, and I think that might be the problem with the Artesh as well. They might be trained and know how to use weapons, but do they have the bullets? Do they have that support as well? Or are they only getting the rounds to practice with, and then they get more rounds after the fact? Because that's Cuba's MO on how they get their soldiers. And I'm done now.
Wait, what was the question again? Sorry, I missed it because I was trying to post a link.
Well, my question is this. In the Artesh, in Cuba, every male has to do 2 years of service. They get to shoot a gun, that kind of stuff, okay? But when they're in country, there's no bullets, or very few bullets. It's only target practice, okay? When they get sent to Venezuela to do protection work, they get armed to the teeth.
No, if you're serving in the Artesh, you get real guns and real bullets if you're serving.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Who's next?
Okay, next we have Noah, and he'd like to speak about Trump, China, Iran.
I thought we had Ali put a 2 in the chat, no?
Oh, my apologies. Yes, to respond, we have Ali.
BT. I'm kidding. Anyway, yeah, so Cuba has you could call it threat of the US invading it and taking it over, despite how destitute it can get. But keep in mind, Iran shares borders with 14 countries, many of whom would love to invade the country and take some part of its land, which would be terrible and would probably take that opportunity. So if you have the IRGC, weakened to this point monetarily, and then the Artesh is weakened even further because they're not getting any funding now, like nothing at all, and people start leaving their posts on the border, which is why if you're conscripted into mandatory military service, you're usually sent into some border for a while to serve there. And if you're not there, then that's a huge issue. So I would not like to see that. I'm just raising that as an issue.
Okay, I want to respond to that. I 100% agree. And just for everyone's information, it hasn't been on the after show. I was born after the Bay of Pigs, which was a US-led invasion into Cuba, and after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Bay of Pigs is using Cuba as proof the United States will invade, period. Proof. And that's how they've been able to keep their people under control without threatening their people.
Okay.
Okay, next to respond, we have Noah.
Thank you. And Jose, you can correct me if you want. I don't mind any corrections at all. So I highly doubt the Cuban regime would even consider massacring that many people like what happened in January in Iran, just because Cuba's 90 miles away from Florida, and there are so many Cuban Americans living in the US. They would be so livid. Yeah, I could not see that happening without a military response from the United States. That's my response
I understand, and you're actually right, but it's one of those things that nobody knows right now because no one understands. This is the third generation under the Castros. Okay. Well, technically, the Iranians, this is their second generation. Their parents' generation was the generation that helped the regime go in charge if they were the communists. You know what I mean? It's a difference of that one extra generation.
All right. And then Jeffrey?
I was going to ask you real quick if you can help me out there, Jose. What is your overall perspective on the human security concerns as they exist right now in Cuba vis-a-vis the Castro regime trying to hoard all? They already do that. I'm just saying, like, where
Okay.
is it at with regards to food, water, and critical medicine?
The Castros have food. The large part of the actual communist regime, if you're in Havana, you're more likely to have food than if you are in the camps. Okay, you got to remember cows, pigs, horses, sheep, they've been eaten already. Okay, they have chickens, but chickens are valuable for producing eggs, which you can trade, barter. What do people eat other than chicken? Toads, big ass toads that make the chickens look small. Okay, they don't fish, so there's no fish supply coming in. Why? The fishing boats took off when Castro took over, and they went to the United States. They went all over the Caribbean, and they haven't been back. And yes, there might be over 1 million people in Miami that are of Cuban or Cuban descent, and you might have another million between Kissimmee and Tampa. But my father made me promise before I died that I wouldn't join the U.S. military, Jeffrey, because he was dead positively sure that Ronald Reagan was going to invade Cuba. And that fed into the mindset of the Cuban people that the United States was going to invade.